I spent 10 years building my dream home, wiring every single room with state-of-the-art technology. My entitled stepson thought he could lock me in my own basement to throw an illegal, influencer-filled rager. He remembered the heavy steel door. He just forgot who wrote the code for the security system. When I married Valerie 5 years ago, I knew her son Brandon was going to be a handful. He was 14 at the time, firmly planted in his rebellious phase, and fully convinced that the world owed him a living. Valerie, bless her heart, was a fiercely loving mother, but she had a massive blind spot when it came to her boy. She excused his poor grades as creative genius and his outright disrespect as expressing his boundaries. I tried to step in as a father figure, but Brandon made it abundantly clear he had no interest in my guidance. He didn't want a dad. He wanted a limitless credit card. By the time Brandon turned 19, he had dropped out of community college to pursue a full-time career as an influencer. His days consisted of filming highly staged prank videos, renting luxury cars by the hour to pretend he owned them, and hanging out with a crew of self-proclaimed VIPs who were just as hollow and entitled as he was. I tolerated him living under my roof only because I loved his mother. But my true sanctuary was the house itself. I am a senior cybersecurity architect by trade. Over the years, I had poured my heart, soul, and a significant amount of my salary into turning our property into a fortress of modern convenience. Every light, lock, thermostat, and speaker was hardwired into a central server located in the basement. I wrote the custom subroutines myself. The house recognized my voice, adjusted the climate based on my biometrics, and was guarded by a commercial-grade smart alarm system that could deter a bank robber. The incident happened on a Friday in late October. Valerie had flown out to a wellness retreat in Sedona with her sisters for the week. The moment her flight took off, Brandon approached me with a proposal. "Hey, Harrison," he said, leaning against the kitchen island with that trademark smirk. "Some big networking executives are in town tonight. Huge names in the creator space. I need the house." I didn't even look up from my laptop. "No, come on, man. It's just a networking event. A few ring lights, some low-key music. It's an investment in my future." "Brandon, the last time you had a few friends over, I spent 3 days getting the smell of cheap tequila out of the living room upholstery, and someone threw a lawn chair into the smart pool, shorting out the filtration sensors. The answer is no, absolutely not. If you want to host a party, rent a venue." He glared at me, his jaw tightening. "You're not my dad. This is my mom's house, too. And your mom agreed with me before she left. No parties. End of discussion." Brandon stormed off, slamming the door to his room. I thought that was the end of it. I should have known better. Around 8 p.m., I was in my study reviewing some code when the power to the main floor suddenly cut out. The emergency backup generators didn't kick in immediately, which was strange. I checked my phone. The main control app showed a fault in the basement breaker box. Specifically, the circuit governing the climate-controlled server room and wine cellar had tripped. I sighed, grabbed a flashlight, and headed downstairs. The basement is massive, but the server room is a specialized vault in the back corner. Because it houses the main brain of the house and thousands of dollars of vintage wine I've collected, I had outfitted it with a solid steel core door, acoustic soundproofing, and an electronic deadbolt. I walked into the vault, shining my flashlight over the server racks. Everything looked fine. The indicator lights on the mainframe were still blinking green, running on their internal, uninterruptible power supplies. I leaned down to inspect the breaker panel on the back wall. Slam. The sound echoed off the concrete walls like a gunshot. I whipped around. The heavy steel door had swung shut. "Hello," I called out, walking over to the door. I grabbed the handle. It wouldn't budge. I pushed the manual interior override button. Nothing happened. The keypad's digital display was completely dead. Then, from the other side of the heavy door, I heard muffled laughter. It was faint due to the soundproofing, but unmistakable. I banged my fist against the steel. "Brandon, open this door." A moment later, Brandon's voice came through the small, grated air intake vent near the ceiling. "Sorry, Harrison, you left me no choice. The VIPs are arriving in an hour, and I can't have my buzzkill stepdad ruining my brand. Don't worry, there's plenty of water in there. I'll let you out tomorrow morning when everyone is gone." My blood ran cold. "Brandon, listen to me. This isn't a joke. You're committing false imprisonment. Open this door right now." "Relax, old man. Take a nap. Have some of your fancy wine. The internet is about to see who really runs this house." I heard his footsteps retreating up the wooden stairs. Then, the heavy basement door at the top of the landing slammed shut and locked. I stood in the dark vault, the hum of the server racks the only sound. He had completely jammed the electronic lock mechanism from the outside, severing the connection to the keypad. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but my stomach dropped. No service. The server room was essentially a Faraday cage, surrounded by thick concrete, steel reinforcement, and the electronic interference of the servers. Wireless signals couldn't penetrate the room. Brandon had known exactly what he was doing. He had planned this. He isolated the circuit, lured me down, and trapped me in the one place in the house where I couldn't make a cell phone call. I was locked in my own basement, and upstairs, my arrogant stepson was about to let a horde of destructive teenagers loose in my pristine home. For the first 30 minutes, panic and rage fought a war in my chest. I paced the length of the server room, testing the heavy steel door with my shoulder until it bruised. I searched for tools, but the room was meticulously clean, just towering racks of blinking servers, a small cooling unit, and rows of expensive wine bottles. There was nothing heavy enough to batter down a reinforced steel core door. I sat on a small step stool in the center of the room, running my hands over my face. The reality of the situation sank in. Valerie wouldn't check her phone until the morning due to her retreat's strict no-tech policy. I was entirely on my own. Upstairs, I could feel the faint, rhythmic vibration of heavy bass reverberating through the ceiling joists. The party had started. I imagined them tracking mud across the imported hardwood floors. I imagined them spilling sugary drinks on the custom-built leather sectionals. I imagined Brandon parading around, playing the wealthy host, disrespecting everything I had worked a decade to build. The anger crystallized into something sharp and cold. I looked up at the towering black server rack in front of me, the primary terminal, the brain of the house. Brandon thought he was a genius because he figured out how to jam a door lock and disable the Wi-Fi router on the main floor. He thought my only connection to the house was the consumer-level app on my iPhone. He didn't realize that the very room he locked me in was the command center for the entire property. I walked over to the secondary rack and pulled out a sliding drawer that housed a physical keyboard, trackpad, and a 2 4-inch high-definition monitor. I hard-booted the display. A black screen with a flashing white cursor appeared. I typed in my root administrator credentials. Access granted. Welcome, Harrison. The screen bloomed to life, displaying a highly complex, multi-panel dashboard. This wasn't the simplified app Brandon used to turn on the living room lights. This was the developer backend. Every single sensor, camera, microcontroller, and audio node in the house was laid out before me in real time. I clicked on the security camera matrix. My heart rate spiked as 16 high-definition video feeds loaded onto the screen. The house was completely packed. There had to be over 200 people inside. It wasn't a networking event, it was a full-blown frat-style rager. In the main living room, Brandon had moved the custom furniture to the walls, creating a makeshift dance floor. A DJ was set up on my antique dining table, his heavy equipment scratching the century-old wood. Neon strobe lights pulsed erratically, casting harsh shadows. I switched to the kitchen feed. A group of girls in tight dresses were sitting on the marble countertops, pouring liquor directly from the bottles into each other's mouths. Red Solo cups littered the floor, and someone had tipped over a massive indoor potted plant, scattering soil across the pristine white tiles. I switched to the master bedroom feed. Thankfully, that door remained locked. I had hard-coded the master suite lock to biometric access only, but I watched two guys trying to pick the lock with a pocket knife, gouging the expensive paint job in the process. Then, I spotted Brandon. He was in the center of the living room, surrounded by a ring of people, holding up their phones with glowing ring lights. He was holding a microphone, shouting over the deafening music, pointing to the house around him as if he had bought it with his own money. "Look at my mansion," he was mouthing. "Look at my life." He was using my home, the home he banished me beneath, as a prop for his fake internet clout. I leaned back in the chair, cracking my knuckles. The helpless, trapped feeling evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated power. I wasn't a prisoner in the basement. I was the ghost in the machine. And I was about to teach Brandon a masterclass in psychological warfare. I opened a new terminal window and brought up the smart home's environmental controls. Let's start small, I thought. Let's make them uncomfortable. I targeted the HVAC system. The house was currently set to a comfortable 72 degrees. With 200 bodies sweating in there, the AC was working overtime. I overrode the safety protocols, bypassed the wall thermostats so they couldn't be manually changed, and cranked the central heating to its absolute maximum output. I watched the live feed. For the first 10 minutes, no one noticed. But soon, the ambient temperature in the living room began to skyrocket. The heavy winter furnace blasted hot air through the massive vents. The temperature reading on my screen ticked up. 78, 82, 86, 90 degrees. On the cameras, the dynamic of the party visibly shifted. People stopped dancing. The girls on the kitchen counter began fanning themselves with paper plates. Guys were peeling off their jackets, sweat glistening on their foreheads. Brandon wiped his face with the back of his hand, looking confused. He walked over to the wall thermostat and started jabbing at the touchscreen. I zoomed the camera in on his face. The screen on the wall was entirely black, displaying a single, glowing red padlock icon. He hit the screen harder, his mouth moving in frustrated curses. "Strike one," I whispered to the empty vault. Next, I moved to the lighting grid. The DJ had synced his equipment to the house's smart bulbs, creating a pulsating, colorful light show. I severed the DJ's Bluetooth connection to the house mainframe. Instead of plunging them into darkness, which might just cause a panic, I engaged what I called the interrogation protocol. I shifted every single bulb in the living room, kitchen, and hallways to a stark, blindingly bright, clinical white. 100% luminosity. The sudden, harsh lighting killed the party vibe instantly. On the camera, the crowd recoiled, squinting and throwing their arms over their eyes. The romantic, club-like atmosphere vanished, revealing the absolute filth they had brought into my home, the mud, the spilled drinks, the dirt. Without the forgiving neon lights, they just looked like a sweaty, gross mob trespassing in a bright white box. The DJ threw his hands up in confusion, trying to reconnect his tablet. Brandon pushed his way through the crowd, looking panicked. His carefully curated aesthetic was falling apart in real time. But I was just getting warmed up. I accessed the plumbing controls. The house utilized a centralized smart valve system to prevent flood damage. I highlighted the guest bathrooms on the main floor. With a few keystrokes, I shut off the water supply to all the toilets and sinks. Then, I remotely triggered the electronic locks on the bathroom doors the moment they registered as empty. I watched as a few partygoers tried the bathroom handles, rattling them in vain. They turned away, crossing their legs, looking desperately for another option. The discomfort was spreading like a virus through the crowd. Brandon was furiously tapping on his phone. I smiled. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to open the smart home app on his device to regain control. I opened the network traffic log. I saw his phone's MAC address pinging the router, desperately trying to send commands to the lights and thermostat. I highlighted his device on the network map. I didn't just kick him off the Wi-Fi. I created a custom firewall rule. Whenever Brandon's phone tried to send a command to the house, the network intercepted it and sent back an automated push notification to his screen. I typed the message out carefully. System override. The basement says, hello. I kept my eyes glued to the camera feed. Brandon was standing near the stairs. He looked down at his phone. I saw his entire body go rigid. The color drained from his face, visible even under the blinding white lights. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes darting around the living room, staring up at the ceiling, looking for cameras. He realized I wasn't just trapped down here. I was awake, I was online, and I was in absolute control. I leaned forward, my fingers hovering over the master alarm trigger. Now, I thought, let's end this. Brandon stared at his glowing phone screen, his face becoming a mask of absolute terror. I could see the exact moment the dark realization finally hit his brain. He was not the master of the house. He was just a foolish rat trapped in my digital maze. I decided it was time to speak to my unexpected guests. I routed my heavy microphone through the premium surround sound system, hidden inside the living room ceiling. Those speakers were designed to mimic an elite concert hall. I adjusted the audio equalizer, dropping my voice an entire octave before pressing the button. Attention! My voice boomed through the massive living room. The sound was so deep and resonant that it visibly shook the decorative glass fixtures hanging on the walls. On the multiple high-definition camera feeds, I watched as over 200 teenagers froze simultaneously. The hired DJ instantly dropped his expensive headphones. The girls, sitting on the marble kitchen island, stopped pouring their expensive liquor. Complete and utter silence quickly fell over the entire chaotic crowd. They looked around, frantically searching the room for the source of the disembodied voice, their eyes wide with confusion and rising fear. This property is currently under a total security lockdown, I announced, keeping my tone perfectly flat and robotic, carefully masking the furious satisfaction boiling inside my chest. You are trespassing on private property. The authorities will be dispatched shortly. However, before the local police arrive to strictly escort you off the premises, we are going to play a little game. Brandon, step into the center of the room. The crowd immediately shifted away, treating my stepson as if he were suddenly highly radioactive. He was left standing alone, sweating profusely under the blinding white lights. Harrison, Brandon yelled, staring up at the white ceiling, desperately trying to sound tough for the people actively filming him on their smartphones. Cut the crap right now! Turn the music back on and open the basement door immediately. You are ruining my highly important networking event. I chuckled softly, a low, menacing sound that echoed ominously off the imported hardwood floors. You locked me inside a reinforced vault, Brandon. You foolishly tried to take my home hostage. Did you honestly believe that I would just sit quietly in the dark? You brought a toy to a digital gunfight. I decided to firmly divide and conquer. The absolute best way to break Brandon's fake influencer facade was to make him a total pariah among his so-called VIP friends. I accessed the house's internal audio routing matrix. I easily isolated sound to specific rooms and even specific speaker arrays within those spaces. To all the guests, I broadcasted smoothly. Brandon lied to you. He does not own this massive home. He does not pay the bills. He is a 19-year-old college dropout who maliciously locked his stepfather in the basement just to falsely impress you all tonight. He is currently facing serious felony charges for false imprisonment. I continued relentlessly. If you leave through the front doors within the next 5 minutes, I will delete the high-definition security footage of you trespassing and vandalizing my personal property. If you choose to stay, your clear faces will be immediately handed over to the local police precinct. Total chaos instantly erupted. The frightening promise of severe police involvement and permanently deleted digital footage was all the vital motivation these aspiring internet celebrities needed. A chaotic mass exodus began as teenagers scrambled wildly toward the grand front foyer. "Wait! Stop!" Brandon screamed desperately, running toward the front doors to physically block their exit path. "He is just bluffing! He is entirely trapped down there! He cannot do anything!" "He is just a sad old IT guy." I leaned into the microphone. "Am I bluffing?" I whispered coldly. I quickly activated the expensive smart glass panels installed inside the front foyer windows. With a single precise click, the completely clear glass instantly frosted over, turning a solid opaque white. Then, I remotely triggered the heavy electronic deadbolts on the massive front double doors, sealing them tight. A loud, heavy mechanical noise echoed through the grand entryway as the thick titanium bolts slid perfectly into place. The terrified crowd at the door gasped loudly, pushing forcefully against the heavy mahogany wood. It was solidly sealed, shut. "Let us out, right now," someone screamed frantically. "You are totally free to leave," I replied calmly, "but only through the back patio doors. The front doors remain securely sealed until Brandon properly apologizes. In front of absolutely everyone. Live on all of your little streams. Right now." I watched the camera feed closely. The angry crowd slowly turned their furious gaze toward Brandon. The important VIPs he had tried so desperately to impress were now glaring at him with pure, unadulterated hatred. One tall kid named Jackson shoved Brandon hard in the chest. "Apologize to your stepdad, bro," Jackson snapped aggressively. "I am not getting formally arrested because you wanted to play pretend in someone else's expensive mansion. I am not apologizing to him," Brandon shouted back, his loud voice cracking with deeply humiliated rage. "This is my house, too. I have legal rights," I sighed, audibly into the microphone. "Incorrect." I quickly shifted my tactical attention to the outdoor smart pool environmental controls. The rear patio doors led directly out to the expansive wooden pool deck. A large group of panicked guests had already started rapidly moving toward the back exit, desperate to completely escape the sweltering heat inside the main house. I patiently waited until about 50 sweaty people were gathered closely together on the wooden deck, right near the dangerous edge of the deep swimming pool. Then, without any warning, I fully activated the backyard sprinkler system at maximum pressure. Water blasted across the patio area. These were not just gentle lawn sprinklers, but high-pressure irrigation cannons normally used for deep garden beds. Heavy water blasted across the patio in sweeping, violent arcs. The influencers shrieked loudly as expensive outfits and fragile devices were completely drenched in freezing cold water. They scrambled frantically over the wooden fence, slipping repeatedly on wet green grass, desperately sprinting toward the dark street. "Look what you are doing!" Brandon yelled furiously at the white ceiling, pacing around rapidly. "You are completely psychotic!" I simply smiled in the dark. I quickly noticed that the hired DJ was frantically trying to pack up his very expensive turntables to immediately flee. I definitely could not let him safely leave with my antique dining table looking exactly like a brutal scratching post. "You, the DJ," I said, firmly isolating the audio feed to the overhead speaker. "Leave the expensive equipment right there. Walk away immediately." The DJ froze completely, looking up in sheer panic. "Man, this fancy gear costs 10 grand, he pleaded nervously. "I am just hired help." I remained entirely unsympathetic. "You brutally destroyed a solid mahogany table. Leave the expensive gear as collateral or the front iron gates will absolutely not open for your vehicle." The DJ hesitated briefly, then cursed loudly, threw his hands up in defeat, and quickly joined the fleeing crowd. The entire house was emptying incredibly rapidly. What had been a packed nightclub just 20 short minutes ago was now a complete disaster zone of spilled sticky alcohol, abandoned wet jackets, and totally ruined party decorations. Only a small handful of his closest, most stubborn friends still remained huddled together very nervously. Brandon himself was pacing in tight circles, his pale face extremely red, his chest heaving with rapid, panicked breaths. He quickly pulled out his broken phone again, desperately tapping the cracked glass screen. I checked the live network logs instantly. He was desperately trying to call his mother. I had fully anticipated this exact cowardly move. I completely intercepted the outgoing cellular call at the main router level and immediately redirected it. His broken phone rang twice loudly before I picked up the clean audio feed on my headset. "Mom, you absolutely have to answer me," Brandon pleaded pathetically into his device. "Your mother is currently unavailable," I replied coldly through his phone earpiece. "She is at a quiet wellness retreat, finding her inner peace. Meanwhile, you have entirely lost yours. You have exactly 2 minutes remaining before I initiate the final harsh eviction protocol," I warned sternly. Brandon threw his phone violently against the hard wall, completely shattering the remaining glass. "I deeply hate you," he screamed loudly at the ceiling. "You will definitely not be here tomorrow," I stated coldly. I immediately opened the master security console on my bright screen. It was officially time to heavily deploy the final nuclear option. I fully bypassed the standard burglar alarm and accessed the commercial deterrence system instead. "Commencing final eviction," I announced loudly over the house intercom. 60 seconds. "Do not do it, Harrison," Brandon yelled loudly, finally showing a tiny crack of genuine mortal fear. I totally ignored him. I quickly selected the emergency strobe function for every single smart bulb in the entire house. The blinding white lights instantly began to flash at a highly disorienting rapid frequency rate. It aggressively created a vicious stroboscopic effect that made it virtually impossible to walk straight or maintain normal physical balance. Then, I decisively triggered the deafening sirens. The premium surround sound speakers blared aggressively. The loud external alarm horns and the internal security klaxons all violently activated simultaneously. They completely emitted a terrifying high-pitch, undulating wail at exactly 110 decibels, the literal acoustic equivalent of a massive jet engine taking off directly inside the messy living room. The horrible sound was absolutely paralyzing. On the live cameras, Brandon and his remaining terrified friends quickly clapped their hands tightly over their bleeding ears, their pale faces heavily contorted in pure agony. The violent strobe lights made their highly panicked movements look exactly like a choppy, terrible, silent horror movie scene. They physically could not take it for more than 10 excruciating seconds. The remaining few stragglers completely abandoned Brandon, blindly sprinting toward the back doors, completely desperate to finally escape the totally overwhelming sensory overload. Brandon was the absolute last one left standing. He stood totally alone in the center of the aggressively flashing, screaming smart house, holding his hands extremely tightly over his sensitive ears, warm tears of sheer total frustration rapidly streaming down his red face. He looked completely broken. The arrogant fake influencer persona had been permanently stripped away forever, leaving only a terribly frightened child. He clumsily stumbled toward the long front hallway, finally giving up entirely. As he slowly approached the massive front doors, I quickly deactivated the titanium deadbolts with a very sharp, loud mechanical clack. He weakly shoved the heavy doors open and clumsily stumbled out into the freezing, cool night air, immediately collapsing onto the damp front green lawn. The exact moment he completely crossed the door threshold, I swiftly shut the massive doors tightly behind him and instantly locked them down permanently. I instantly cut the loud sirens and flashing lights, returning the house to absolute calm. I compiled all video clips into a highly secure digital folder. The next early morning, the local city police quickly arrived. responding to urgent noise complaints from my neighbors. Brandon was still soundly asleep on the wet front lawn, shivering in his ruined designer clothes. I formally pressed serious criminal charges against my entitled stepson for illegal, false imprisonment, unlawful trespassing, and severe malicious property damage. His entirely fake online career immediately ended completely overnight when the clear footage leaked online, permanently destroying his carefully crafted internet image forever. My beautiful smart house was finally my perfect personal castle once again, providing me with total, absolute peace and truly complete, absolute, pure silence. If you love this story about a spoiled influencer getting exactly what he deserved, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more wild drama and crazy revenge stories. Have you ever had to deal with an entitled stepchild or a roommate from hell? Tell me your wildest stories down in the comments below. Ring the bell so you never miss another unbelievable upload. See you soon, guys. Thank you.